Hi, Ajantha. Thank you so much for making the time to be with us today. I know you're based in the UK, which is just around the corner from Australia. So we do appreciate you making the time. And we feel extremely lucky to have you here today because you are in that role of a clinical trials manager, which is, we haven't had the opportunity to speak to someone with your experience before. And as you know, in the Huntington's community, clinical trials are a very vibrant topic that we speak about on a regular basis. So to have someone like yourself who has that experience of it, it'd be really great to hear from you so the community can be educated about what it means behind the scenes to be part of a clinical trial, what the work takes to actually bring it to that part where it's ready for a clinical trial, is really exciting for us. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Tammy, for inviting me to this video interview series. I've been actually looking forward to having this conversation. So, just to add a bit more background to what you already mentioned about me. So, I'm currently working as a clinical trial manager, and I've been part of the industry for about 5 years, a little more than 5 years. So, I'm responsible for all the clinical aspects of the study from the startup to the closeout. So, I manage the study, and I'm also expected to have more knowledge on the specialized therapeutic area, but I work in the neurology therapeutic area and specifically focusing on multiple sclerosis. So that's my current specialization. When it comes to my understanding of clinical research, it has been such a significant learning curve for me. Initially, before being part of the industry, my understanding was very limited. It was limited to a general definition that says, clinical trials, they test out new medical interventions. It could be a new drug, diagnostic procedure. Besides that, I've had few negative misconceptions about clinical trials, but however, all of this changed a great deal due to, first-hand knowledge and observation of how clinical trials are actually being conducted and how it's fundamentally designed to protect the safety and well-being of the participants.
The question I really want to ask for someone of your in-depth experience is there've been a great deal of clinical research studies throughout time. And from those studies, what have we learnt about ethical concerns and safeguards for those individuals who want to participate in clinical trials today?
So I think when we talk about evolution of clinical trials in a bigger picture, you can always see that it's very clear that the primary aim has always been to protect the safety and protect the well-being of the participants. I think this evolution has been driven by continuous improvements that are mandated. It starts from strict ethical laws and standards. There's introduction of institutional review boards called IRBs, and then we also have continuous educational programs for researchers. So the strict ethical laws and standards that I referred to earlier, they start from mandated guidelines, like it started from Nuremberg Code, there's Declaration of Helsinki. Starting from those guidelines, it extends up until each country's own specific laws that governs trials, and its main aim is to protect the participants. Human research studies should be designed in a way to minimize risk and to maximize benefits. That's the message that's driven to these researchers. Again, when we talk about the evolution, we'd also obviously have to take into account the technological advancements. There is advent of digital data, there's online studies, and there's so many ethical issues that arise with the technological advancements. But the good news is that these are being constantly managed and identified. These are being mitigated at every instance. Overall evolution of these ethical guidelines, and as well as the oversight mechanisms like IRBs, they have significantly improved how research has been conducted. And I think that this also ensures that participants are treated with respect and care, and they are given the choice of making their own decisions, their informed choice about participating in a study. And also they are absolutely protected throughout the research process.
And I think you've beautifully described how research has learnt from history, because as we know, there's been research that was conducted many years ago where there were ethical issues, and so the research community learnt from that. And then also what you're basically articulating is that researchers are not in a bubble, they're actually moving alongside society. So as you know, we have issues with social media and online platforms, particularly after COVID, where everything was online, so protecting people's data, medical records and so forth. So I think you've demonstrated that research moves with the times and the issues to ensure that ethical concerns and safeguards are kept in place, which is very reassuring. So thank you for doing that. For our community, they have been hearing concepts such as regulatory bodies and ethical committees. Could you possibly explain what those bodies do within a clinical trial?
So when it comes to regulatory authority and ethics committee, they are an independent body, but they act on behalf of the government to maintain the integrity of human research studies and also to mainly protect the lawful rights of the participants. There are multiple authorities globally. Their main responsibility is to ensure that the studies are compliant with the strict guidelines that are provided to them, and also that the data protected is reliable. So these authorities, they continuously review protocols, they monitor ongoing studies, and also they determine the safety and efficacy of a new treatment before it's being approved for public use. We also have ethics committee, which is kind of an additional oversight on top of the regulatory committee authority. So ethics committee, they basically scrutinize everything from the study design to the informed consent process to any other ethical issues that may arise during the conduct of the study. This is mainly to prevent any potential harm to the patients that might arise when they participate in a clinical trial.
What you're really saying is people can be reassured no matter which country they're situated in, there is a regulatory body, and that there's an ethics committee process that is always overseeing the design and the implementation of that clinical trial.
Absolutely, yeah.
I would really appreciate if you could unpack what informed consent means when you're considering being a part of a clinical trial.
So informed consent process, I believe it is the cornerstone of modern human research studies. If you look at an informed consent form, it's usually provided in layman terms so that anyone can understand the content of clinical trials or what's going to happen or what to expect from a study and without any scientific background. So I think that dispels the myth that clinical trials are too complex to understand or it's difficult to comprehend what's going to happen to you as a participant. But all of that would be clearly explained in an informed consent form. And again, when we describe the informed consent process, there's also an imperative for the research side to make sure that the participants are satisfactorily, they understood the content, they are happy with the content, and there are also any questions or concerns that the patients might have. It could be a silly question that they think it's a silly question, but it's not. It could be any other questions that the patient might have before participating in a study. And those questions or concerns must be satisfactorily answered by the research side beforehand. And it's also important to understand that the informed consent process protects the patients and it gives them the right to withdraw at any point. And they could, at their own discretion. So they could basically go in the middle of the study saying, I'm not going to be part of the study anymore and I'm withdrawing. And that's their absolute right. Informed consent process, in a nutshell, it protects the participants' rights. It gives them the right to understand and ask questions about the clinical trials. And it upholds the ethical evolution that we talked about earlier when it comes to, evolutionizing human research studies to fit the patient needs and to fit the patient's safety and protecting the patient's safety and well-being.
Would you encourage people, if they're thinking about becoming part of a clinical trial and they're sitting down with someone like yourself and you're going through the process of what it entails, to ask questions, and there is no such thing as a stupid question in that process?
No, absolutely. I think because I've been a research associate before being a trial manager, and I've been working with research sites to help patients understand clinical trials, and I've been part of the recruitment process as well. So I've seen patients come up with questions that are absolutely essential for them to understand. We cannot oversee, the questions that we call silly or basic, that there's no silly or basic questions when it comes to clinical trials because the patient has to be absolutely they should be understanding of what's expected of them from the clinical trial and what's going to happen to them and what can they expect from the clinical trials. The patient should be reassured that it's the imperative of the research side as well to make sure that the patients are comfortable and that the questions are answered. So I think that there's no silly or basic questions when it comes to informed consent process. Yeah.
That's a really fundamental point that you just pointed out, that on the opposite side as professionals, we should be checking in and making sure that what we're relaying is being understood as we're meaning it to be. So I think that's a really fundamental point that you raised. One concept that consistently comes up in clinical trials is placebo, which many people are unsure of what that means, and when clinical trials are implemented, people believe they're all being treated with whatever it might be that the clinical trial is focused on. I'd really appreciate if you could demystify what is placebo treatment and why is it so important in all clinical trials?
Yes, I think we've heard the word placebo for far too long. But to define placebo, it's a very crucial component, especially when we are designing clinical trials, because it helps us to understand the effectiveness of a new treatment. So basically, placebo, it's an inactive substance that resembles the active drug that we'll be testing out. But the main reason it's being included in the study is just that we can be sure that the new treatment is better than no treatment at all. So that's the whole point of bringing in placebo for a study. Placebo is a crucial component for clinical trials, mainly because it validates the efficacy of a new treatment before it's widely adopted for public use. So it's our responsibility as clinical researchers to make sure that we are absolutely 100% sure that there is the new treatment is effective than no treatment at all.
So it gives you effectively a comparison, doesn't it, in layman's terms, that if you're trialling a new treatment, then you can compare it to the placebo group within the clinical trial to see if it's actually having an impact. But I'm sure it's the same in your country, where you have some countries that are big and people want to be a part of clinical trials, often accommodation or travel, and the cost of that can be a burden. How within the clinical trial space is that accommodated for to ensure that you have a variety of participants in your clinical trials?
Being a clinical trial manager, and when we are planning budgets for a study, we can see that a major focus is drawn towards allocating budgets specifically for making patients' lives easier.
So would you encourage people when they're asking about clinical trials and potentially thinking of participating to ask those questions as well?
This question of what's going to happen to me if I participate in a trial and I'm expected to meet the expenses, which is never the case, there's always reimbursement policies, there's always initiatives that's implemented to make sure that the participants are made comfortable, their daily lives are not disrupted, they don't have to think about the expenses that comes up with the participating in a clinical trial. So all of that is being put in initiatives and implementing initiatives to make sure that participants can join the study without any other questions in their mind, I think.
Thank you so much. You have answered all my questions and covered them beautifully. I thank you. Is there anything else that you would like to add that you believe I have not covered?
One major innovation that I would like to point out is something called decentralized clinical trials. So they are also called DCTs. So DCTs, they are different from the traditional trial models. So they leverage remote monitoring, they leverage virtual visits, they leverage digital technologies. So I think all of this, it reduces patient burden. It optimizes the trial performance. It paves way to equitable healthcare. And ultimately, at the end of it, you can also see improved scientific research.
We are so appreciative that the community in itself is so committed to helping us and looking at improving healthcare for all. We're so appreciative. Thank you so much for your time. It has been such an experience, a positive experience speaking to you, and I know that the Huntington's community and even others outside of that who are potentially from the MS community or the MND community will watch and listen to you, and I'm sure that they will learn as I have. So thank you. I'm so appreciative.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Tam. Thank you.